hope this works. I see Nancy. I see Tony. Can anybody hear me?
Radio.
I'm here. Nancy's here. Tom's here.
Am I coming through?
But I'm not getting any of Tom's audio.
I'm getting Tom's audio and
Hey, Tom, on your Zoom, can you see your microphone icon and does it turn green when you talk?
Nancy can hear you.
yes. I see both of you and hear.
You can see me and
Yeah.
hear me?
Yes. I don't want to turn my
I
camera
can
on
only see
because
you.
I haven't
So
combed
did you
my
just
hair.
switch apps and it worked?
Tell
What?
Anthony that there might be a tab on his computer muted. If you can hear me, Nancy, then can you?
Yes, I can
I'm
hear you
fine
and
going
I
back
can
to
see you.
Facebook.
I
We
can
can work
hear
it out
you.
Tell
there.
Anthony.
Or we can wait for Nancy to chime in. I can't hear Nancy either right now.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Tom, can you hear me?
Nancy. Yes, I can.
Okay. Am I supposed to open
So
my
he's-
camera?
Can you do me a favor? Type in the messenger group, the Shepherd's Room. Tell Anthony we can see each other. Tell him he has it muted for Zoom somewhere. He's got to check his audio settings for his speakers for Zoom. He's sending to the wrong speakers. That's why he can't hear us.
Oh,
So I had that problem.
Nancy, are you here?
Yeah,
I'm
type in the
okay,
chat.
you know what? Should I open my camera?
Yeah.
Can you hear Nancy?
All right. Okay. I haven't combed my hair or put my
Oh, you
makeup
can hear
on.
Nancy.
Boy,
Yeah.
are you
Okay,
lucky.
You can
then
hear me.
let
you
me
see me?
try
No.
to
Now my camera light is not on.
go to my settings then.
Dummy.
There.
Hey, I see you.
There's mine.
Okay, I see I'm there. All right, boy. I don't like
Okay,
people
let's-
seeing me like this, but since we're in the same group, it's okay.
Oh, why is there's a headset registering? And that's where the Zoom meeting audio is going. Well, you know what? Let's just turn that off.
Did you write instructions, Tom?
I did.
Yeah,
it.
I think you beat me to it.
Oh, I can do. Well, okay, so I'll be fine without it if that doesn't work. Let's see. Select a speaker. All right, there we go.
You can hear me?
Yes, I can. Nice and loud.
All
Okay,
right.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
Hi,
all
Nancy.
right. So we can all see and hear each other.
Wonderful. So just so you know, I'm doing a recording of this on the cloud. I'm not going to
Okay.
share it publicly, but I might go back later and condense it into something useful. So if you don't want to be on camera, that's fine. If you have a good question, I can just put your audio.
It's okay. I'm vain, but I'll survive. I
All
see you
right.
in a shipping container.
I did. I got my shipping container. It's a 40-foot shipping container.
Holy crap.
So, or as I'm telling other people, my 1,400-foot expansion on my shop.
Now, what are you putting on your wood there?
This is a clear polyurethane coat. So it's just something the customer requested. Before I chop the pieces, I stain them up. So that way it's faster.
So that
Well,
must
I'll
be
be doing
pretty
that
fast
from-
drying. You put that down on the side that you just put the coating on.
So I've got this little wire mesh here.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna run the other side, and then you can't see this, but I've got some of these racks standing up where
Uh-huh.
they'll slide like this.
Oh, that's so cool.
And I can do 100 of them on these little cheap shelving that I bought. That's why I bought them.
Wow.
So just a necessity and the mother of invention and whatnot.
Well, yeah, you should see the stuff I do. Okay, now, other person, it doesn't say your name. I don't know your name.
Yeah, let me see if I can get everybody on screen at once here so I can see everyone who's here.
Well, I can see everybody at the top.
Yeah, I think my settings, I think I need to change. What was that? View. I don't know how to make the view change. Oh, there we go. All right. So Tony, I can see you. I see you're muted.
That's Tony, okay.
Yep, that's Tony. I see.
Okay.
I'm gonna get started because I'm on a clock. I'm gonna stand over here and talk at my normal volume. Give me a thumbs up if you guys can hear me from over here.
Yes.
All right, so I'm not a teacher. I've never taught a class, but I've been in lots of classes, so I'm just gonna, I guess, pretend that I'm one of those guys and see what happens.
The only thing I've ever taught is martial arts.
Okay. Yeah, why don't we take a second and just do some real brief introductions, where it's going to be a small class because you get to know each other.
Okay, I'll go first.
All right, Nancy, go ahead, lead us off.
Okay, Tony, we've never met. I've just seen your posts, but anyway, so I'm Nancy Luchek. I know Tom through, well, Facebook and groups and stuff. And I'm retired. I'm 71 years old. I retired very early because what I did was a physically demanding sport. I taught martial arts. And so I was financially able to just not have to work anymore. And I live in Oregon. I'm a widow. I've been widowed for 8 years as of, well, tomorrow. And I have a dog. Where's my dog? Come here, Ray. Tom hears about you, but never seen you. This is my roommate. She's a Boston Terrier. She is 8 years old. Her name is Ray Ray. And so during the pandemic, she's just been about my only company. And let's see, I like to sew. I have I do sort of work. It's not really work because I love to do it. I make Nancy Drew collectibles, the literary girl sleuth. I'm licensed with the publishers, and they actually just take a very small royalty, 10%. And that is more fun than I can express. And I make all kinds of stuff. I'm going to make, I don't know if I don't have one in here, but for my church, I work limitedly with the children just by doing crafts. Theme related, we're doing a Christmas craft on the 19th. So I'm working on that now. And
Let's just save some for next time.
okay.
Tony, how about you? If you can speak, do you want to introduce? If you've got to stay quiet, we can skip that for now.
I do not have to stay quiet. I'm Tony. I am a DJ and a cheerleading coach and a minister of music, and recently incorporated positive speaker. I'm spiritual, believe in all energies, empathetic. I met Tom through Paul. I'm in a lot of groups. I have a lot of groups and run a lot of groups. My life motto is people are our greatest resource. That's an acronym for PAOGR, P-A-O-G-R.
Oh, okay.
Yep, the PAOGR universe is what I've defined as my digital consciousness. And now that it's incorporated, it's going to move into something greater than me. So I'm putting leadership and whatnot in place, and we're going to move forward with international projects, actually. What else? I got 4 kids. I have an Instagram for them. I run over 50 platforms. I have a project to try to talk to 100 people a day next year. Every single day of next year.
Wow.
100 people.
It's ambitious. All right, I have one question for you. I'll give you each a minute, and then I'm going to jump into the content. The format's going to be just kind of long form lecture. So we'll use the hand raise button if we got to jump in. Sometimes I'll stop. Sometimes I might keep going, depending on what I'm trying to do. But the question I have for each of you is, what are you hoping to get out of this series of lectures? And if it's just simple curiosity, that's fine. But if you have anything that you're looking for, let me know, because I'm going to cover a lot and I'm going to have to pass a lot. But if I recognize parts of things that are in your answer, I'll spend more time there because that's what you're here for. So let's start with you, Nancy. What are you here for?
Well, because you're here, and to get to know you and anybody else in the group as well. I've been pretty much a hermit during the pandemic, and it's time to not be so, and exchange thoughts and views and just stuff.
All right, no, that sounds great. That's a good reason as any. What about you, Tony?
Well, when the pandemic hit in 2019, I was online going through different empathetic groups, and I called myself, or thought of myself, as a demon hunter. Eventually, I sat on the Heyoka group, and once I became a moderator there, I stopped demon hunting and started building an army in a sense, or switching sides to be more home-based rather than going out seeking things outwardly. That led to a dramatic increase in the people who I gave my energy to, which in turn changes me. I am here because Tom thinks he's special, and I don't think he wants to say he's special. So my goal is to crack his brain like an egg and then fuse it with the Peyoga universe for whatever future purposes we deem fit. I literally use that phrase, not often, but whenever I say it, it definitely has a vibe behind it. Like when I tell somebody I'm going to crack them like an egg, that's weaponized empathy at its best.
It is.
Weaponized empathy is the core
We could all use a little
concept.
weaponized empathy, I think.
Yeah.
You're gonna
So that's why I'm
once we get to Tony, I think you're going to be very interested in, when we get to the lectures, on social algorithms. Social algorithms. I got 4 classes of social algorithms. I broke it down from beginner to expert. And even though it was slightly out of order and I had to shoehorn it, I wanted to put one of the sexy classes early up. So the next class is going to be mental martial arts. So I'm going to teach you guys a way that I viewed and still view conversations. I used to view conversations exclusively as a martial arts contest.
Wow.
And how I understood consciousness. And part of that is true. It's not the only way, but if you find yourself in a hostile situation mentally, there's an art to that, and I'm going to teach you what I know about it, and maybe you'll teach me some stuff too.
Chris
All right.
Voss says every conversation is a negotiation. At the
Yeah.
very least, you want each other's attention.
Who is that adorable child behind you?
Openings, how to spot weaknesses, how to
Older son.
all that stuff. My mental martial art is Aikido, by the way. It is a style of redirection. There's not a lot of force in it. Punching and brawling is what people do already. So you guys don't need any education in that. I'm going to teach you how to at least get around some of these hostile situations where the person really doesn't seem interested in anything but giving you a hard time. So, all right. So having said that, I got my notes all here so I can see. The format's going to be a little bit all over the place, but that's because to me, this stuff is not linear. It is a web. So I'm going to start in the center of that web. I'm going to define some terms. I'm going to put some axioms down, some things that are true, that I think are true, or at least for the purposes of this instruction, we're going to act like are true and explore them and see what it means if they're true. And I'm going to share all the things and reasons why I think they're true. What else? So this is the first class, and the title of it is Cognitive Physics. This is Introduction to Cognitive Physics, or Cognitive Physics 1. So if anybody heard the word physics and didn't think I was going to be talking about math and science, well, I hope you like to be surprised, because there's going to be math and science that I'm going to talk about. Because that was the first way I understood how my brain worked. And so from there, I'm gonna transition into a little bit of a biography that's gonna establish the first core concept of this. And we're gonna talk about mental languages. All right, so if you think about like Spanish and English, those are great examples of what mental languages can look like, because there's words that are common. There's words that sound like they should mean the same thing and mean very different things. And then there's completely different words that you can't even recognize unless you take the time to learn both English and Spanish. So I really think that's how it's to behave when people talk to each other. Everybody has their own understanding of what's going on around them. Everybody's got their own definitions for things. And when we communicate, our main goal is to exchange one type of information with somebody else in the hopes that they understand that information the way we try to present it. So the goal of it is kind of important. So if you're talking to somebody and your goal is to be understood, then learning that there are different ways to say the same thing is kind of a big part of that. And the people who have become the most successful, they're the ones that learn how to navigate that. And that's a social skill. It's an emotional skill as well, because your emotions will tell you, and the other people's emotions will tell you when you've messed up. You got it wrong. You made a bad assumption. Or you used a word that means the right thing to you and isn't a personal attack. But that person, unbeknownst to you, has some kind of baggage associated with that word. And so you can't use that word if your goal is to communicate with that person. That's all part of what it means to have mental languages. It's figuring out not only how what you say is interpreted by you, but how what you say is received by someone else. Because if the goal is just to be a good talker, well, you don't need an audience for that. You can practice, oration and inflection and doing impressions till you're round ready and it's spot on. Your Christopher Lloyd's pretty good too. But if the goal is to have other people know what you're talking about, then it's not enough for you to know what you're talking about. That's what I mean by mental language. Being clear is half the battle. Being understood is the other half. And you're really not going to get one without the other, because it's difficult. Because there are as many dialects of mental language as there are human beings. So think about that for a minute. We've got like groups. Carl Jung, the analytical psychologist, calls these groups archetypes. And you've heard some of them before, and you've probably seen all of them in every movie. Like Han Solo in Star Wars is the scoundrel. He's the bad boy who breaks rules, but he only breaks rules to help people because he recognizes that rules sometimes do the opposite of what they're trying to do. And he puts doing the right thing above that. He's kind of like cocky and self-confident and all that. Well, that didn't come out of nowhere. People had to people had to accept, at least on some level, that that kind of behavior has value in the right circumstances. So they look at this Han Solo on screen and they say, wow, that guy's pretty good. You know, he shot that guy, and maybe he even shot first, depending on who you ask. He flies the Kessel Run in under 12 parsecs. And yeah, he's entertaining and fun. But you ever ask yourself, why is he entertaining and fun? Why is that interesting? Well, it's because through his actions and his presentation, he is speaking a language that is easy to understand. It's a language that transcends words because it's a combination of words and actions and appearance and expectation that all point in the same direction. So he's on message with more than his words. So that's kind of the concept of mental languages. And you can put that in any direction. And that goes beyond just spoken language and spoken thoughts. Like most people have an inner monologue. And that inner monologue is a type of language. And that's the kind that most people would think about I'm talking about when I talk about.
Do you?
What's up, brother?
Do you? When I was watching your documentary, that's one of the things I was wondering. Because our minds work differently, something that a lot of people find it hard to grasp is that everyone doesn't have an inner monologue or an inner voice. And I was wondering, do you have one?
If I had to describe my inner monologue, I would say it is like a swarm. But it's not a swarm that's on. It's 1,000 voices that are so quiet you don't know anything is being said. And that's peaceful and everything is balanced. But when I need information or when I become unbalanced, that puts a ripple through it and different parts of me react to that differently. And so what I do then is I listen inside my mind and hear the thoughts that start to pop up. So it's almost like a wave going on the ocean, and I listen for the parts that are high because those are the parts that interacted with what I was doing. So it's you talk about energy and Tony, so you're probably and you're a DJ, you're probably very familiar with frequency and waves, wave amplitude addition. So a different way of saying that is if I have a good map of my mental energy, or at least a good awareness of my own mental energy, when something interacts with it, then it creates wave amplitude addition and makes those high spots, maybe in ways I don't understand, but because I know that's what's happening, I can tell that those 10 random thoughts that I just had really aren't random, they're connected somehow. And if I can figure out how they're connected, that will be useful to me. So if that answers that question. But that's not, I understand that that's not everybody, because this is actually a good transition. If I had to describe my mental language, I just described something very similar to sonar or echolocation. And that was how I figured out that from my perspective, I'm mentally blind.
Can you elaborate?
Yes. So what I mean when I say that I was mentally blind, I called it the power of the dot. And that's going to be another term that you'll hear often. So I'll take the time to explain it. The power of the dot. So imagine that you were in outer space, and it's just black all around you, and you can only see what's in front of you. Now also imagine that you can't move. You don't have any jetpacks or fins or rocket boosters or anything. So you're pointed in one direction. All you can see or sense is what's right in front of you. But here's what makes it the power of the dot, you see. So the power of the dot can't move on its own, but the power of the dot can go anywhere it's been before. It can see and it can go anywhere that it's taken to.
The familiarity.
What's that?
The familiarity.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a wizard spell where the wizard can only go places he's been before, like the movie Jumper. So that was kind of my mental language. Like I couldn't see anything without somebody taking me there and showing it to me and explaining it to me, like showing me around. And it took me a long time to understand what was going on, because if you're blind in the world right now, we've got people for that. Like we understand what that means. We, you know, you can, hey, you're blind. You're gonna need a cane, and here's a dog. And everyone's gonna understand what's going on, and they're gonna help you. You know, they're not gonna throw a soccer ball at you and say heads up. But when it comes to things that are common ways of perception, when it comes to thinking, well, it's kind of taboo to talk about anybody's way of thinking right now. You can't, even the attempt to understand it sometimes causes like anxiety or anger. So there's not a lot that's really done to look for stuff like this. And in the most extreme cases, we just put a label on it. Hey, that person's autistic. That person's got Asperger's. That person's got ADHD. Oh, that might be true. And it's true because those are the words we made up to describe what's going on. But the way that we describe what's going on makes it sound like it's got everything to do with luck of the draw and nothing to do about how you think about thinking. Later on in the course, I'm going to tell you guys about ADHD, depression, and anxiety, and how it's possible just by thinking the right way to completely deprogram all of those things.
Absolutely.
You can make yourself think faster. And that's not made up. I learned how to do it step by step. You can learn how to make the world slow down just by thinking about it the right way. Your body temperature, blood pressure, your body's adrenaline centers. All of these things are things that work inside you by accident or without your control. But anything that the human body can do by accident, you can learn how to make it do on purpose. And you don't have to take my word for it. There are books and cultures and monasteries full of people who have devoted their lives to that. There's videos right now. You can go and watch these guys sit outside in 20-degree weather with their shirts off, getting water poured on them. And just because they're meditating the right way, the steam from their bodies is like drying these towels around them, and like they can raise their body temperature just by thinking about it. And I'm saying that through personal experience, it's not just some of your body's external systems. You can do that with the way your mind works, and you can learn tricks that you weren't born with, that other people were born with, by understanding how to do on purpose what they're doing by accident. And that comes from self-awareness. So let's see here. The goals of the course. Yeah, you guys told me why you were here. I guess it's only fair that I tell you why I'm here. A couple things. Is one, people don't know this about me. Or if they do know this about me, they don't trust it enough to ever take advantage of it. I like helping people. And I like it when somebody asks me for something I can do. Something that's not difficult for me. Maybe even something I wanted to do on my own. I always try to find a way to squeeze everything in. So if I can work at teach and share and making people good. That's my first goal. And my second goal is kind of similar to something that Tony mentioned, where I feel like it's time for me to make a copy of my mind, sort of.
I understand.
Directly at everything I think, but I'm copying the rules, the programming behind it, the source code. I think that, and this course is going to talk a lot about how human beings are not, what's the word? Human beings follow rules the same way as the rest of the universe does. And that includes the energy that gives us our consciousness. Energy and mass are the same thing, E equals MC squared. We are bound by the natural laws of the universe, even within our own minds. And we just don't really understand fully what that means. And I've been mapping that. And that's where all the cool stuff lives. So I want to get that out there for myself. Let's see. The limitations of the course. Well, me and you. So we're the limiting factors here. We're human beings. And a lot of this stuff isn't in books that I've read. I haven't read a lot of books, if I'm being honest. I've listened to a lot of stuff. Had a lot of really good conversations, done a lot of social experimenting. But I don't pretend like I've got everything. I feel like I've got a good enough piece of the puzzle that it's time for me to share what I have so that other people can think about it who are going to be smarter or more creative or differently perspective than I am. Like, it's a good time to share and then see what happens. It's like time for that. Next stage. Let's see here. So the language of this course, I'm going to be using a lot of stories, personal stories, metaphors, that sort of thing. I'll cover this in a later section. An entire class will be on it, actually, about how most of the way we understand consciousness and the way we process information is Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. Human beings are creatures of stories and relation. And there's a reason for that, which we'll get into, a very important reason. But stories are one of the best ways to share information, especially difficult information, because it allows for a certain level of passive disassociation. Like, a story makes it more digestible because it's not a direct threat. It's not you that has to change to understand it. You can understand what happens in the story and then decide if you want it to change you. That's kind of how that works. So there's going to be a lot of stories, because I think sometimes a really good story sums up something perfectly. Like, everybody understands, when you watch Pinocchio, right? And the kid lies and his nose gets bigger. And everybody understands that. Like, the more you lie, the more obvious it's going to be to everybody except you, because
Right.
you can't see the nose at the end of your face, but other people will. So that's how I bridge the gap that I talked about with mental languages. Stories. Stories are great for bridging those kind of gaps. All right. So I'm going to cover some definitions now, because these are words that I'm going to use a lot. So I really want to make sure that these words are understood the way that I need.
I'll be right back. I have a delivery at my door.
Okay. I guess I can. Got any questions while Anthony, or while Nancy's getting the delivery?
No, that all sounds straightforward, like most things to me.
Alrighty. Yeah, some of this stuff will be reviewed for you. We've talked about languages a lot. My favorite mental language is the language of the subconscious, though. That one's a tricky one to learn, but it's a lot of fun when you understand it.
Have you studied magic in this direction?
No,
No.
I haven't. I can say that I haven't studied it formally. A lot of times I find out that some of the stuff I do goes by different names.
Yeah.
So if there's things that it can do, that would be a better place than things what they're normally called. But Nancy's back, so we'll cover that in a later. There's a whole class on the language of the subconscious, because I think that's one of the most useful ones that you can learn. So definitions, all right? So cognitive physics. So I said before that I didn't go to school to learn how to teach, and I didn't learn a lot of this stuff in classes. So the words that I use, well, if you use them the way I use them, you'll get what I'm trying to say, which is the goal of language. If you miss a definition, or if I'm not clear, and you have the right definition even, well, that's going to make it hard, because I'll sound like I'm talking nonsense. So cognitive, all right? So when I say cognitive, I'm talking, that's a catch-all term. That's an oversimplification. Everything that is in my brain that makes me a person, my thoughts, what I want for breakfast, why do I get hungry? All of that stuff is kind of a catch-all included in the term cognitive, all right? It's just a descriptor. And then physics, well, that one's, the reason I have to call it cognitive physics is because I'm talking about the relationships that you find in the physical world that they study in physics. There's, I'm going to go over a lot of those, because that's what the rest of this class is going to be about, is I'm going to go over scientific ideas that I have used to kind of make sense of all of this stuff. So that's kind of the setup. Before I get into the science, which is coming up now, I got to tell you why. Why would I do all that? Like, that sounds unnecessarily complicated. And like, why would you make a whole science thing out of emotions? Like, why don't you just feel them? Or why don't you try to understand them a different way? I've had a number of people just flat out deny that there's any sort of math or logic or equations that are behind human behavior. And it's just not true. And I know it's not true because before I thought it was true, I said, this isn't true. I better test it and keep testing it. And the more I tested it, the more I was able to figure out. It was like I was giving myself little tiny pieces of a puzzle that I didn't understand every time I did it. So why did I need to do that? Well, as I said earlier, my natural mental language is blindness. I have a blindness of my own perspective. And the best way I can describe that is you don't know what you want, and you don't know how to want things, and you don't have a self-identity. That's the starting point for people like me. Most of what we learn by being alive, by interaction. And my phone came unplugged.
Yeah, I see that. And Tony has to leave in a few minutes.
Okay, so we'll keep going, because I'll record it.
There we
There we
go.
go. I'm plugged in. Yeah, sorry about that.
That's all right.
So
He's back.
yeah, the mental blindness is they have names for that. They call it Asperger's. They call it attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And the short of it means I can't pay attention to anything long enough to ever see it change.
Mm.
Okay, so here's what that means. If I am looking at this roller here, and I see this object pointed toward the camera, and then I see this object here, the same object turned a different way, so it looks a different way. My brain can understand this object. My brain can understand this object. My brain resists watching it go from one to the next.
Oh, yeah, good explanation.
So I lose the power of observing transition.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some very good reasons behind that I didn't understand until recently that have to do with some things that happened when I was younger. And so for me, that was a learned behavior that was put in very early. So what that meant was I had no continuity. I would look up and I would see just a random collection of dots. And then I would open my eyes and it was a completely different random set of dots that had things in common with the last set of dots I was looking at, but things didn't work. Especially people. People didn't work the way I could understand them because I didn't know what was happening when I was talking to people. I couldn't understand where their emotions were coming from. I also had a blindness to my own emotions. I didn't feel them. I didn't feel emotions for 35 years.
Wow.
Except the bad ones. And even those weren't like the complex emotions. It was like rage. The shortest circuit in your brain is the threat detection. It's like 4 neurons or 3 neurons or something. And it's like a jump start to make you pissed off. And that was really the only thing I could feel was negative emotion. And even then, not very much of it. But I know I didn't like it. But more, I didn't like not being able to communicate with anybody because nobody understood what was wrong with me, including myself. And so I was just a weird kid. The guy with no social skills, the guy with Asperger's, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's hopeless, he's got Asperger's, nothing we can do about that. But we didn't even understand what that was. So what did I do, right? Like it's easy for other people who don't have Asperger's to be like, well, that's too bad. That's a rough life. I'm glad I don't have to deal with that. I'd be lying if I said I don't say that about other people when something really bad happens to them and it doesn't happen to me. Like, it's no hard feelings. I'm just, yeah, it does suck to be you, and I'm honest about that. So yeah, it sucks to be me that I had Asperger's and all that other crap going on. So I'm living that life, right? And it's a confused life. And I did the only thing I could think of, which was trial and error. I had a decent enough memory, and I was creative, and I really didn't give up, which is important. And I was like, okay, there's got to be rules that people are following. If I can't understand people, I'll learn the rules, and I'll learn them so well that it will be like I understand them. And it started slow, like, okay, there's about 500 ways to say hello. And a bunch of them have different meanings or slightly different meanings, which you figure out after, I don't know, 10,000 tries, which version of which words with which kind of person will get the result that you're hoping for when you say hello, which is a smile, a pleasant interaction, and then the end of that social interaction. And the only tool I had was brute force. I just tried all the combinations. And every time something didn't work, I said, okay, what did I do wrong? What kept me from success? Where did it go wrong? Number one, okay, the conversation broke down when I said that. Well, why did it do that? Well, I guess he doesn't like to talk about that. Why not? And so on. And I did that for so long that it's kind of the way that we map the sky. It's kind of the way that we do a lot of data analysis. Like you'll get an oversampling of the data. You'll get 20,000 data points. And for me, it was probably closer to 20 million. But eventually you look at all those data points and say, well, hang on a minute, there is a line or a form or a set of rules that explains part of that. And then it makes sense. And then you can go back, well, if that makes sense, then what happens when I go over here and try to do that? Oh, it doesn't work anymore. Okay, so now it works here and it doesn't work here. Well, they have a name for that in math, that's algebra. So you can use a concept that you're familiar with and put it in a situation that you're not to figure out.
Absolutely.
What's that?
I said absolutely.
So that was kind of the reason I started all this, was it had nothing to do with trying to unlock the mysteries of the universe or be some guy know-it-all or teacher or whatever. I just didn't like it that when I talked to people, they didn't understand me. And so I wanted to learn everything there was to learn about being understood the way I want to be understood. And it's difficult for me because my mental language is one of blindness. And so how do you explain being blind to someone who doesn't understand that concept even exists for the mind? It's a challenge.
All right.
So that was why.
I might be back in 15. If not, I'll see you guys in the chat.
Okay,
All right.
bye, Tony.
I'll make the link to the cloud when I can, when it's ready. If you missed
All
some.
right, no problem.
All right. So yeah, where was I? So yeah, there was so I kept doing all that mapping, right?
Mm-hmm.
I did my job because I just hated not being understood and not feeling like I belong. And during that time, I went to college. I had jobs and relationships, and I had my degree in physics. And so I took all these classes where I had to learn, well, this is, what Newton's laws of motion, quantum mechanics, and differential equations, and super calculus 2. It's a lot of math. A lot of math and a lot of ideas. And then one day I was thinking and it hit me. And I don't know how or why it all put together, because who knows where good ideas come from. I'll tell you guys later, but for now, who knows where good ideas come from when you have them. Sometimes they just appear. And that's what happened with this one. Cognitive dissonance behaves like Newtonian motion. And that was the first thing I ever understood about people that made sense and explained so much of their behavior. Not all of it, but a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, that was the constraining factor, was Newtonian physics behaves, particle physics behaves like cognitive dissonance. So this is the part where I'll go over that in cognitive physics too. How? And I'll do that for all of these, because I just don't have time to do them all and introduce all the concepts. So I'm going to skip now to the different scientific fields where I've seen an idea that matches behavior and social experimentation that I have done. Because it's how I know how to talk to people now. I used to, believe it or not, I didn't talk to anybody. I didn't care about talking. I didn't like to go out. Hated it really, because it was draining. I didn't know what to do. So I wanted to do things, but I couldn't play the way the other kids were playing, so I just moped about it. But you wouldn't know that talking to me now. Like, I could talk to a group, I could get on stage. I can, make myself understood if I have someone who has even an ounce of patience, because, they have to want to understand you at least a little bit. for that. Or if they don't want to understand you, they have to want to be understood bad enough to deal with talking to you. Sometimes they hold themselves hostage for that, which is good because it'll give you a chance to bridge the gap for them. So I'm going to talk about the ideas here. The first one is the laws of thermodynamics. So I'm not going to make any tests on this, but the general concept of the laws of thermodynamics has mirrors for social behavior. I'm going to cover that. So first one, if two systems are in thermal equilibrium with a third system, then they are in thermal equilibrium with another. Okay, so that's a mouthful. What that means is that's the transitive property of mathematics. And I'll explain what that means too.
Just so you know, Tom, I was into physics and chemistry and all the sciences. So I get a little bit more than you know.
Good. I'm hoping that, I don't know what sort of people will be interested in this when I turn it into a video. Hopefully people who understand a little bit of this, but if not, thankfully that's not required. But it helps. And the more deeply you can understand the math behind it, which was my advantage, the more broadly you can apply it.
Yeah.
I'm actually asserting that not only do these relationships exist, but a knowledge of the mathematics behind them has a direct ability to be put into practice. And so yeah, they're equal with the third system. So that means if you've got one place that's 20 degrees and another place that's 20 degrees, and you can use this with energy, temperature. I'm just using temperature because it's easy. Then that means that if the first place and the second place are the same temperature, or the second place and the third place are the same temperature, then the first place and the third place are the same temperature. That's kind of like, it's establishing that there's rules that are consistent across different systems. There are things that bridge dimension. Things can be wildly different in shape and presentation, but have the same temperature. And even though they look completely different, their temperature is the same if that's what's being measured. So that's the first one. Conservation of energy. There's another one that everybody's heard. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. It just changes form. Later on, I'm going to just give this topic, or I'm just going to give this definition and not explain it till later. The conservation of cognitive dissonance is a thing.
Of consonant what?
The conservation of cognitive dissonance.
Oh, okay.
That's a thing I made up. You're not going to find it in any books,
Okay.
But it's real. It's real and it's useful. And it was the first thing I understood about humans. The first thing I understood about how to interact with people predictably. So conservation of energy. Well, let's talk about that. Gets into the Newtonian laws of motion. Conservation of momentum, right? Like if you got a ball that's rolling, it's got an energy behind it, and then it's going to roll in a certain direction because that's what motion is. It's energy and direction. So if you've got another ball that's rolling with the same energy, and it's rolling directly at the other one in the opposite direction, well, those two balls are going to hit each other, and they're going to bounce off each other. And the same amount of energy that goes from one is going to go to the other. So the energy is conserved. And we'll get into that later. But that's kind of the point, is the energy, it always goes somewhere. So when there's a conversation that's happening, what I'm saying is that there's an energy and a direction and a magnitude of the ideas behind that conversation. And one idea can be made up of many different dimensions of something. Let's say somebody might be combining a sense of justice with practicality, with critical thinking combined with compassion, right? That's a complicated thing, but people can present all of those things balanced together as one idea, and they do it all the time. But the ability to know that if you attack or influence or impact one of those dimensions with an opposite point of your own, there's going to be a collision. Like, you see it the best when people argue, right?
Uh-huh.
2 points ran into each other. And what do? Well, oh, I guess they must not have heard me, or my point must not have been strong enough. Well, I'm gonna try again, even harder. And then it escalates. And you hear that term, and you hear about de-escalation tactics. What that means is that when two objects ram into each other, the energy doesn't disappear. It just, both people feel it double at the point of impact, and then they separate. So it's a very violent thing if you're thinking about it. If you think about ideas that way, like the forcing of an opinion on somebody, that's, you're just ramming into them and creating a collision. Both of you can feel it, at least on some level, because people don't stick around very long when that's happening. You know, they either blow up, fight each other, or they leave, or one of them gets tired of doing it, but both of them do. So that's that one. Let's see here. Work. Okay, that's a science term. Work is when energy is transferred. So that's that can take many different forms. But let's keep it simple for now. Work is when something is put into motion. Let's say that I see somebody who's making a point, or somebody's rolling a billiard ball. I want you to imagine those two things as the same thing. Somebody making a point and somebody rolling a billiard ball. All right, your point has direction. It's where you're trying to make the conversation go. And it has a velocity. How much of yourself and how much of your force of personality is behind that point? Or how fast did you roll the ball? So those two things need to be understood to know what you're doing. So say you see a ball that's rolling. This ball doesn't know that you can understand cognitive physics and that you see his idea as a ball, and you see that that ball is made up of a very specific character trait, like they're talking about truth and justice, and you know that if you roll a truth and justice shaped ball that looks like a truth and justice shaped ball, and it hits his idea in a direction that is not head on, instead of a collision, you know there'll be a deflection.
Right.
Well, deflection is better than a collision, especially if somebody's turned around. You're never going to turn somebody all the way around in one go, because that's not how it works. People don't like to do that. It's too much. Full stop. You know, they don't like to be stopped from going forward. Nobody does. Everybody gets really annoyed when they get held back and stopped in their tracks. So you got to do a circle. And that's kind of how that works. So that's the idea of the Newtonian laws of motion and how they tie to human behavior, specifically cognitive dissonance. And the more deeply you understand cognitive dissonance, and the more deeply you understand Newtonian mechanics, the more easily you'll be able to use that method to teach yourself how to use these things in the real world. I've seen some real trick shooters. Rick Ulrich, who's in the Shepherd's Crook, he knows exactly what shot to take. Down to the, he's run people into people with one comment. He knew he needed this piece of information just because he could. He knew if I say this to that person, then that person will say that to that person who will react this way, and he's dead on. And that's because his mind is autistic, like mine. His mind is a spider's web, and most non-autistic minds are linear. Or to say it a different way, the conscious mind is a linear language, and the subconscious mind is a web language. So each one has advantages and disadvantages. But those who can get more in touch with their subconscious mind, they can see the patterns and connections in ways that a linear perspective never will. And so that's part of this too, is a lot of it's going to seem like it doesn't really connect, and that's a linear thinking problem. The question isn't why doesn't it look like. The question is, why is this guy saying things that don't connect? It should be, how is what the things this guy is saying do connect? Because I see it, and anyone who does see it, I think, is going to have an advantage over someone who doesn't, just because of perspective. Which brings me to the next point. Higher dimensions. Like, yeah, there's a lot of science in this one. So, higher dimensions, right? Like, everybody understands 3 dimensions. So we're going to start there. It's length, width, and height. Or the world that we live in, it's 3 dimensions. And I'll call that 3 spatial dimensions, meaning 3 dimensions in space, just to keep it simple. We're only talking about space here. We can add time later, which is a different thing. So 3 dimensions, right? Well, as a 3-dimensional thing, we can understand a 2-dimensional thing very easily. It's a sheet of paper, right? Length and width. So we can't, like, if you lived on that sheet of paper and you were 2 dimensions, you wouldn't understand that there was a 3rd dimension of height off the paper, right?
Right.
That wouldn't make sense to you. You only have 2 dimensions. Like, the height doesn't exist for you. Length and width is all there is. So say that you live in an office building in your 2-dimensional office, and you need to put paper on your desk. But number one, you can't put anything on your desk because it's 2 dimensions. You have a desk, you have one piece of paper on the floor, and another. We're going to ignore the fact that how can you have floors to stand on for the moment. But they're very thin. Let's just say they're very thin. But yes, you can't even put a piece of paper on a desk because the desk is there and you don't have height. But imagine that you were a 3rd-dimensional benevolent being and you saw this person's ridiculously simple problem of how to fit 10 pieces of paper in a regular room. And you said, don't worry about it. Give me your pieces of paper and I'll put them away for you. And you just ask me when you want them back. And next to their 2-dimensional sheet of paper world, you take all of their papers and make a little stack of them. And it takes up a fraction of the space. So in the same amount of space, you are able to condense infinitely more mass using the 3rd dimension than you could using the 2nd dimension. So that's kind of the idea there. That's as good as that explanation is going to get, because I'm going to keep going with it in other directions that should make it useful enough for context anyways. And by the way, the more you understand higher dimensional geometry, the more you'll be able to make use of the concepts of higher dimensions when it comes to languages of consciousness. So you see, like, sacred geometry. Now that stuff comes from somewhere. And what that is those are shapes that are 2-dimensional representations, because we draw them. They're 2-dimensional representations of 4-dimensional objects and 5-dimensional objects, and so on. But we're going to go in the other direction for now. So we understand the 2-dimensional world now and what it means in difference to the 3-dimensional world. But let's go down even smaller, the 1-dimensional world. That's just a point, right? Like a single point. So everything that exists in that 1-dimensional world is all in one spot. And the 2-dimensional person could say, wow, I could fit so many of those 1-dimensional spots in my 2-dimensional world, and it would be the same thing. But then the 2-dimensional guy would be like, well, I can't do a 3-dimensional thing. The 3-dimensional guy says, yeah, I can. And so for us, it would be the same thing. Hey, I don't have any room in my house. where am I going to put all this stuff? And then a fourth dimensional being says, don't worry about it. I'm just going to put it in this room over here. And you're like, what do you mean you're going to put it in that room? It's full. It's not. No, it's not. I'm going to use the other dimension that you're not using right now. And you could fit, the entire contents of the world inside your room if you were able to use the fourth dimension. And all you would have to do is trust that this fourth dimensional guy who's being your friend isn't going to say, ha, gotcha, now I got all your stuff. Because you'd have no way to get it back. But if it's a fourth dimensional thing and it can contact you in the third dimension, chances are there's nothing you're going to be able to do to it anyway. So whether it wants to be your enemy or your friend is really up to it. You really don't have a say. But anyways, so we'll talk about that. The reason I mentioned higher dimensions is it matters because human beings can think in more than 3 dimensions. And we do think in more than 3 dimensions. A recent study, and I have to remember where, mapped out that human beings think in either 10 or 11 dimensions. And that's not just smart people, that's the default setting of our hardware. Well, think about it. How else can you walk and chew gum at the same time? You're doing it somehow. Like if you could only think about one thing at a time, you wouldn't be able to do anything. Really, you couldn't even talk. You're gonna breathe and move your mouth and pick what words you're gonna say. Well, that's 3 things right there. So, but then that's not just for stuff that you're coordinating with your body. It's also ideas that you can coordinate with your mind. Man, that really makes me angry. Okay, so you're angry. That's a one-dimensional emotional response. Man, that really makes me angry, but I understand he had a tragic upbringing. Well, now that's anger and compassion. That's a 2-dimensional response. Yeah, but this guy, he had all these chances to reform, and he had all these choices, and he just cast them off. So now that's logic plus compassion plus, and et cetera, and et cetera, and et cetera. So as you add dimensions of thought, the complexity of your understanding goes up. And as you remove dimensions of thought, your understanding goes down. So it's the same idea as dimensional storage. You can fit exponentially more into a higher dimensional understanding than you can fit into a 1-dimensional or 2-dimensional understanding. And it's orders of magnitude bigger. Orders of magnitude, that's a science term, I guess. That's a math term, really. Orders of magnitude. Okay, so let's say that I'm talking about the difference between 1 and 10. Okay, well, 10 is 10 times more than 1. Or, because it's 10 times more, it's an order of magnitude bigger. So, if I said that 10 or 100, 100 is 1 order of magnitude bigger than 10. It's 2 orders of magnitude bigger than 1. And then 1,000 would be 3 orders of magnitude. So what I'm saying is that every time you go up in dimension, you are not adding, you are multiplying your potential to understand a thing. So the more dimensions you can think about at the same time is not linear, it's logarithmic. It goes up faster and faster the more you can do it. So that's another concept. That's why the concept of higher dimensions exists. And when I get to that lecture, I'm going to go and show you how to take an idea that is a point, because you make a point, right? How to take that idea and make it align with a different idea, and how to make that a plane with a third idea, and how to build. So essentially, I'm going to give you the map for constructing mental geometry in higher dimensions. There's a formula. And as much as you have the patience to map it out, is as much as you can get out of it. The highest one I've been able to think about at least formally on paper, is a fifth dimensional concept, which is a lot of points. It's like, it's a lot. You just have to do the math. Because the number of points you need to go up a dimension is also exponentially higher. So there is a limit to the number of points that you can get. Because if you're trying to make a three-dimensional mental object, all of your points have to be good ones. They can't contradict each other. There needs to be a testing process, some way to like weed out the junk. And if you're lucky enough or fortunate enough to find somebody who's done some of that, or you just have really good judgment or whatever, that you have access to good points, that's a large part of the battle there, because not every point is a good point. And I'll show you how points go bad. That's another thing that I'm going to cover later when I talk about axioms and measurement, points of measurement, point of observation. I'll give you a little teaser. When people make a point, they're not making a point, they're making a line. They just don't realize it.
Yeah.
The reason they don't realize it is they don't understand they are the second point that makes the line. They have an idea. Oh, this is a thing, this is my point. Well, how do you see it? It's a one-dimensional construct. And the Heisenberg uncertainty principle says that points only exist as hypothetical constructs. You can't ever find a point. You can only say, here's where a point could be. But if you are looking at a point and you are the other thing that is a part of that, well, between you and that point, there is a line. And you are the point of observation. And that's where a lot of people get lost, is they don't realize they are part of the line that they are using. And that line can be wherever they want it to be. And it will be wherever they want it to be, because they don't know why their line doesn't make sense. So they have to keep moving their side of that line so that it does make sense. And their other point that they can clearly see doesn't move. So that's kind of how that works. What else? Motion, we did most of that. Oh, okay, here's one that I need some more boards. Hang on, intermission. I'll be right back.
I'll be right back too.
All right. All right, ready?
Yep.
All right, so this one, I'm actually gonna grab my paper for it, because this one, the picture means a lot. I'm gonna hold this up. This here is a map of something called bifurcation.
I know what bifurcation is. Okay.
Very good. That's a tricky one. Bifurcation, for
Ow.
those of you who haven't, describes systems that are limited by their environment. That's what matters. You see how it splits into those wishbones. Those wishbones have a mathematical relation to each other. They're the same curve.
Oh, yeah.
One is the square root of x, one is the square root of minus x. Those are known as the stable solutions. They intersect through the same point. And then you see it goes from 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 8, 16, 32. And then after 5.34 iterations, it becomes a fractal. So that's why it splits into that. It starts out the splitting thing, and then it goes fractal, which is the same way that a lot of things behave. Your lungs, when they grow, they use bifurcation. Your veins are a bifurcation system. The veins on a leaf are bifurcation. Electricity follows bifurcation. The distribution of matter in our brains, it's a bifurcation system. The distribution of matter in the universe is a bifurcation system. If you look at the universe and substitute out the appropriate players for parts of the brain, the universe has its matter distributed in a pattern that looks very similar to the way that the matter in our brain is distributed, down to the percentages of dark matter. There are the singularities, the black holes in the centers of galaxies. That would be where the information leaves our three-dimensional universe and goes wherever thoughts go. Like if you are a neuron and you fire and you have some awareness that you're a neuron, because I guess maybe you feel pain or understand it, or maybe it's hypothetical. You fire on or you fire off, you don't know what happens with that information. You're done with it. But it goes somewhere. And not to say that the universe is a sentient thing. I can't do that because I can't prove it. But I can say that the universe is physically set up in a way that mimics the structure of human beings and their brains. And human beings are sentient things. There are people who think that the universe is self-aware for that reason. Some people think that's what all of our consciousness comes from. I don't know about all that. That's a big question. The point is, bifurcation is going to be used to describe one of the most important concepts that I have learned in my study of the mind. And I want to preface this by saying, having the wrong idea at the wrong time is dangerous. It's especially dangerous if you're alone when it happens, because it's a new idea and you're not going to know what it means. In fact, it will be the single most worst time for you to have a good idea of what that idea means. Like, you will never have it more wrong than the moment you first have it. That's any idea. So that means some ideas where you have them and you get it wrong right away, if you go down that path too far, you're going to find yourself in a really bad neighborhood and you're not going to know how you got there. So I'm prefacing that because the idea that I'm about to share with bifurcation, when I had this idea, I was by myself and I had an existential panic attack. I lost all sense of self in terms of, not in terms of who I was, that didn't go anywhere. But the change in perspective from where I thought I was to how small I found out I was, and to how little control I had versus how much I thought I had, it put me in a panic. Like, I didn't understand anything. And it felt like my whole life was a lie. Like, I had just been living by bad assumptions. And all of that was the weight of my own misunderstanding. Like, that's not, like, that didn't come from anywhere outside of me. That was me reacting to something I'd figured out. So it was a big deal. There was a lot missing. So bifurcation, I believe, is how free will works. That's the idea that I had. And it sounds innocent on the surface, but when you apply the math to it, it gives a layer of understanding that made it terrifying. because I was able to find myself on that bifurcation map, and I wasn't even in the game. I was not on one of the stable solutions. So bifurcation systems only expand when the things that are inside the system can find the stable solutions. Okay, so how should I describe that? It's about balance. Tao Chi Ching. All right, that's one of the best introductions to duality that's out there. It's simple. It's easy to understand. The parts that make sense. And what's better about it is it's written in such a way that it's very impossible to misunderstand. It intentionally focuses every specter of its being on duality.
I will take that challenge. It's so hard to misunderstand. I'll do my best to misunderstand it. That's my way of saying I'm back. Hi.
What's up, brother? That was my short
That's just my
description
way of saying I'm back.
Welcome back.
All right, brother. So, bifurcation, at least at the beginning, is a really good understanding of duality. And if you think about free will, all right, free will is a tough topic, and we'll have a whole class on free will and what I think it is and what you can do with that. But let's assume that free will is, let's assume free will is a thing. That's easy enough, vague enough too that it can mean anything. Free will exists. Whatever you think free will is, let's let you use your own definition for now too. Well, imagine that your free will that you have is a set of points that you can reach on a bifurcation graph. Okay, or a different way to say that is there's one right answer that makes the stable solution, and that looks like this. It's a parabola. That means that to have the stable solution, it's not enough to have some of the points on that graph. To have the stable solution, you need the formula that makes that graph. Number one, you can cheat. If you figure out the formula ahead of time, you don't need to visit every point on the solution. Or you can do what I did, which is study every point from every quadrant, and it just turns into a game of Battleship where you call out every square.
Right.
And I was left with the solution after ruling out everything that wasn't the solution. So I took the long way. But then I realized, well, there's a saying for that. In India, they would say if 100 blind men have to talk about a tiger, then some of the ones, like the one that has the tail, is going to say that I'm holding a brush with a bristle on the end of it. So obviously, this is some sort of painting device. And the person who is on the back of the tiger is going to say, no, this is a soft and fuzzy thing, and it's obviously some sort of fine quality rug. I don't see where you're painting. And then the person who's on the front, well, he's eating, so he's not saying anything. But the other blind people are going to find his body and figure out that, well, there was some kind of teeth or monster here that got in the way of them examining this combination of rug and paint supply store. So the point is that if the 100 blind men could all get together and put their notes together, they would know what a tiger looks like.
Right.
But they would have no way of understanding what the tiger is or what it does until they figured out enough about what it looks like to start making guesses that have nothing to do with what the tiger looks like. So they have to imagine what the tiger looks like so well that they can figure out how the tiger would behave. And that to me is the same way that our free will works. And so let's call the tiger the stable solution. So if you can figure out the tiger, you can figure out the stable solution, then you have a stable solution, which means you have 1 point on the next part of the graph. You unlock the next part.
Mhm.
Then you have new choices that you can make. You've discovered an unknown unknown. Now it's a known unknown. You know where to put your attention. You can explore it and map it. And that's how you can use bifurcation to think about free will. And you can also think about each curve, each stable solution as a higher dimension. Because it's true, if you go down a bifurcation graph, all the cool stuff happens at the end.
Mhm.
You can't get to that stuff without getting through all of the earlier stable solutions that make that possible. So that's how free will works. There's a lot of rules to how to use your free will if you want it to really be as free as it can be. That means you have to know things that are impacting you that you don't even know exist. Not only that, you have to find out they exist, find out which ones are the ones that are keeping you back and how they're impacting you, and then figure out what that means. And once you do that a couple times, well, now you're thinking about a thing that is built off of something that you thought about another thing, that's built off of something you thought about another thing, that is built off of a very set of detailed measurements you took about a tiger. And if you do it right, because if you do it wrong, it doesn't work. And that's how you know if you're doing it right. Then you can have more options that the person you are that didn't understand those options doesn't even know exist. So you have degrees of freedom that become a part of you that you have access to because of the understanding of, like the way that I say it is, there are things outside of a person's control that they don't know are controlling them. And some things we do know that are controlling us, we don't think about, like we were born on Earth. Well, there's a lot of stuff about Earth that's different from other places. So we don't live in a world where we need constant shielding from UV radiation and spacesuits. That would be a whole different world to live in. So that influences us quite a bit, just in terms of fashion. If nothing else, there would be other things. But or like we live in a world with animals. What if it was just plants? Well, that'd be a real different kind of world too. So that influences us in a way we really don't think about. What about those pesky feelings that we keep having? Well, it's a little closer to home, and every one of those has an impact on us. So that's kind of how I see our free will is anything we don't understand has the potential to influence us in ways we don't understand. So that's that was what gave me my existential panic attack. Was I went from thinking I understood what it meant to be in charge of me and to get to decide what I want to do with my life, to instantly recognizing how much of my life I was not in control of and wasn't even close. And because that was the first thing I figured out, it made me question my existence in a way that wasn't pleasant. And I was very fortunate to have somebody who I had been teaching about empathy at the time, who came into that lesson just in time because he was there and talked me down from panic. Because it was just, I couldn't describe it other than there's just a total loss of identity and meaning. Tony, you got your hand up. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind you about the time. I don't know how time conscious you are, but I know how time conscious I am about all of my projects and everything. So just wanted to let you know we're at 4:35 right now.
Okay, so that puts me at the 90-minute mark. Let me see what I've got.
And I'm not in a rush.
No,
And I'm
I
not
want
in a rush, by
that.
the way.
All right, some of this maybe we'll pick up in the next one. Two quick concepts, the Schrodinger equation and quantum superposition. The Schrodinger equation, that pretty much says that that's the cat experiment, the cat alive or dead. Well, it depends on what happens when you look. The Schrodinger equation, there's a lot of fun that we can have with that, but I'm going to sum that up by saying where you make a measurement and how you make a measurement impacts what you get from your experiment, which means it's very easy to put yourself in an experiment where you are influencing the outcome in a way you don't understand. And the way that that misunderstanding creeps in is an unawareness of quantum superposition. And boy, that's a tricky one. So quantum superposition, I'm wigging out because I can't see everybody. There we go. Quantum superposition, that is the idea that two objects or two things can exist in the same space at the same time, and both of them are true. So it's like a rejection of non-duality. The best way I could say it is, imagine an egg. Well, or no, pencil. Pencil's easier. Pencil's only one ingredient. The lead of a pencil is graphite. Graphite is carbon. So you can understand everything there is to know about a pencil and everything you can do with a pencil and all the carbon, and then you have that. But now let's say you don't understand the pencil, but you understand the carbon atom. So now not only do you understand the carbon atom, but you can imagine the diamond. And you can imagine like the ink that they use for that stuff and the pencil and say, okay, well, great. But now what about in general? Well, now not only can you understand the carbon atom, which lets you understand the diamond, pencil, and ink, but you understand every atom, which gives you helium and neon and boron and all those other things. And so then here's where the crossover happens in mental language. Like here's the mistake, the error. It's the equivalent of asking, well, which one is it? Is it an atom? Is it a carbon atom, or is it a pencil? Well, the question doesn't make sense when you understand what the question is asking. It's not any one of them. To say it's any one of them is incorrect. It is all three of them at the same time. That's the idea of quantum superposition. And I can guarantee you that that applies to mental languages. There's a lot of that. Let's see what else. The quantum uncertainty principle. That's the last one I have on my list for scientific topics. The quantum uncertainty principle says that we cannot know with exact precision the location of an object. We can't do it because of something called the observer effect. If you remember, on a small enough level, energy and matter are the same thing. And because energy and matter are the same thing, that means that at the small enough level, you start to run into energy-like properties, which are wave properties for objects. And what that means is that the act of measuring a thing means to have energy act on a thing, because that's how you measure it. Poke it with a stick. There's no form of measurement that is not at least one part poke it with a stick. That's a great way to think about it. And that poke can be clever. It can be from a direction that gives you what you were looking for without impacting that. But there is no such thing as a poke with a stick that does not have an effect of some kind. So what that means is, and I'll end the class with this, it means that axioms can't exist as objective truths. All right, this is my proof against objective truth, and I'll give that a caveat later on. Objective truth exists. However, it's inaccessible. It's inaccessible because of the observer effect and because of the quantum uncertainty principle. And the only way to get around that is if you so there's a way to get around it. If you are capable of understanding the universe as a single equation, then you don't need to measure its location. And that is how you bypass the observer effect and the quantum uncertainty principle when it comes to understanding an idea. So if the idea is the thing that you can understand as one thing and measure it, then you are no longer impacting it as an observer. Which means, say you have an idea about anger, that's the same way. If you can understand anger as a single unified concept, then you can participate with anger, about anger, and around anger without influencing it, because you are no longer part of that equation. So that's kind of more or less what I've got. I put together some material that I didn't know how to turn into a PDF. I'll save my notes. Included in that material is a collection of disjointed references that someone who's more talented than I would be more than welcome to put together into some sort of dignified lesson plan, as well as some pictures of graphs that I thought were relevant, and a selection of my it-me quotes. People who are watching this, who know me, know that I make it-me philosophies. That's not a gimmick to sell books. It's really not meant to do anything except for what I built it to do. The it-me's are a map of my own brain in terms of what I have found to be useful road signs. Hey, this thing is pretty true most of the time. It makes my life better if I act like it's true. And you build enough of those that you can build your own machines out of them. I find this plus this plus this. Hey, that looks pretty good. So I took some of the it-me's that I felt were relevant to the introduction of cognitive physics, which is this lecture, and I printed those out. And then anyone who wants to ask questions about those can do so. Like, how is that related, or what does that mean, or something else. So that's pretty much all I have for this lecture. Covered most of what I wanted to cover, went a little over on time, had some technical problems at the start. Next one should be better. If anybody has any questions, I've got a minute for questions. I got as much time as you have for questions, but I'm done with the speaking part.
I don't have any questions. I'm surprised that I understood so much of it.
Well, thank you. Thank you. If you had a part of that, I think I'd like to say I had a part of that too, because most of what I've been studying for the last 30 years is how to understand people who don't understand me, or at least how to be understood. So I try to pick words that are hard to misunderstand.
You know, it's, you know, as you know, I've been alone for, 8 years. And yes, I get out. I do have some friends, but I tend to like being alone. And
Yeah.
So this is really good for me to, I mentioned earlier, I studied chemistry. I studied physics. I was a geek. So this is good. You're awakening my knowledge. It's still there. I still know it and haven't thought of it. And
well, the next one I think you'll really resonate with, because it's going to be on martial arts. I'm going to draw some conclusions to speaking with martial arts. I think you'll catch that fast. Maybe even have some things to say on your own.
Something I never knew I wanted to do until I did it. And I only did it because first my nephew started doing it, then my sister, his mother did, and I was visiting and took some classes, and I thought, and found out that was for me.
Yeah. Let me see if, just to make editing in the future easier, if Tony, the floor is open for questions. I don't know if you were present when that offer was made, but,
I've been able to listen. Yeah, I've been listening since I came back pretty much, except 1 or 2 times I maybe left the room. But no, I don't have any questions. I'm definitely gonna do the rewatch. Part of the reason I'm here, or part of the role that I see myself filling, you kind of put it vaguely, but I resonate with the same vibe of if someone more talented than me wanted to put them together into a lesson plan or something like, I'm good at PowerPoint, and I don't really see the appeal of PDFs, but
Hey.
those extra roles are roles that I'm really good at identifying other people to do things for. And
cool. Yeah, that's cool. Struggle with that a lot. Like
yeah,
that
so
one-
I'm good at looking and seeing cracks and stuff. So no questions on my end.
Okay. All right. I guess class dismissed. Thanks for being such a terrific audience. We'll I'll see if the class schedule, I'm gonna try and keep it for days that are middle of the day or the days that you gave, Tony. A lot of that has to do with me being able to line up shop work that isn't using power tools.
Oh, yeah.
So that I was able to successfully do that today. And I'll keep trying to match that up. So I don't know if it'll be every 7 days, like on a clockwork, but I'll try to keep it somewhat regular. And for a while, I'm gonna be, pretty much all of next week should be fine, because I'm gonna be assembling boxes, which doesn't take any power tools at all. That's just,
All right.
So, all right,
Sounds
thanks.
good.
Thanks
I
for joining.
actually didn't know that this was scheduled. I just happened to catch it.
Yeah, Tony Kenny had asked me to, Tony specifically, Kenny kind of globbed on, but, I don't know. He's like a free bird. Sometimes he'll land and sometimes he's off somewhere else. But, Tony was very interested, so I wanted to put my own behind that, make it a little formal. So I even did notes and everything.
Well, it was really good. I'm glad I caught it in time.
Well, good. I'll announce the next one ahead of time, so everyone who wants to be here can be here. And if you had a good time, come by, have a good time again later. All right.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Okay.
great. I'll invite a friend.
Nice to meet you, Tony.
Yeah.
All right.
You too,
Bye,
Nancy.
guys.
I'll see you on